everybody, it's Emily at ARG Schooling, and today I'm going to be doing a video about the best books that I read in this past decade. I saw a lot of people on Twitter talking about what you accomplished in this decade and that kind of stuff, and I thought, why not talk about the books I read in the past decade? 10 years, like, a lot has happened. So I thought it'd be fun to talk about the things that I read that resonated the most with me. So these are in no particular order. I've got a huge array of like genres and things, so there's a lot of books here. 14 books, some of these include trilogies, but I'm counting a trilogy as one book. So I have 14 books to discuss, and I think I'm going to do two lists, because I'm going to do, this is the books that I read for my own personal like reading, and then I think I'm going to do another list that is like the best read-alouds of the decade, because I have a lot of children's books that I've read with my kids that I'm just like, those books sit in my heart too, and I want to talk about them as well. But then my list got really long, so I decided to split it. So I'm going to do, this is my personal reading list, and then if there's interest, I'm probably going to do a best of read-alouds of the decade. So, without further ado, I'm just gonna get into it. These are in no particular order. I literally just like ran through my house pulling things off of shelves. The first book I have here to talk about is Horns by Joe Hill. This is the first book I read by Joe Hill. I've read everything I could get my hands on since, but this is still like my favorite Joe Hill. I don't know, maybe it's because it was my first book by him, but I just adore it. This book made me like question, like, what would it have been like to be raised by Stephen King? Because you must have the most disturbed mind. This story is so twisty and dark, and I love it. I've seen the movie adaptation, and it was pretty good, but not as good as the book. I mean, when is it ever, really? It's pretty rare. But this story is about a character named Ignatius. He goes by Ig, and at the start of the story, it's been a year since his girlfriend, fiancé, had died. And he is the one that is accused of murdering her, but there's not enough evidence, so he's still walking free. But everyone believes that he did it, so he's very unliked in his town. And he wakes up one morning after a night of just terrible behavior and lots of drinking. He wakes up in the morning and he has horns growing out of his head. And no one else seems to notice the horns, but the horns give him this power to like make people do things that he suggests, and it brings out like their worst tendencies. And through all of this happening, he also discovers who actually murdered his girlfriend, and it's just such a deep, like dark, just it's so good. And the writing is excellent, and I just love this so much. The next book I want to talk about will not surprise anybody, and that's Game of Thrones. I started this book like right after we saw the trailer for the first season of Game of Thrones. I'm like, I need to know more. So I went and got a copy at the library. Not this copy, it was like a really old like 80s paperback, you know, with the picture on the cover of like the man with the sword fighting. You know how they used to do those like really cheesy fantasy covers in the 80s and 90s. Well, anyway, that's what my copy looked like, and I devoured it. I thought it was amazing, and I like went through a deep dive over the last decade with this series, and I just love everything about it. I love the dark grittiness of it. I love the political intrigue. I love just the depth of the world building. I just love the story, the characters. I just think it's amazing. The show was great up until a point, and I'm just gonna kind of pretend the last 2 seasons didn't happen and just leave it at that, and just wait with bated breath for the rest of the series to come out in book form, because really that is what I want. That's what I need. So this series has just been like my favorite fantasy series. It's up there in my mind with Lord of the Rings in just like the scope and depth and just great writing. I love it. Another series that will surprise no one is the Unwind. I don't even know what you call it. It's not a trilogy, or what do you call it? Is that like 5 books? 4 books? I don't even know. The Unwind series by Neal Shusterman. This was my very first Neal Shusterman book, and I just thought it was the most disturbing. I think there's a trend here. Are we seeing a trend? I really like when books disturb me. But this book was so just twisty, and I don't know, I loved every second of reading it. I need to finish the series because I think I got to the third book and I just had too many other things I had to get to, so I set it aside, and I've been kicking myself ever since because I really want to know how this goes. So that might be priority in 2020, is to pick up the rest of the Unwind series. Duology? I don't even know. But anyway, this series is great. It's about this future America where there's been this civil war called the Heartland War, and it's being fought over reproductive rights. And basically the gist is abortion is completely illegal, but you have the option of having your child, once they hit the age of 13, I believe. I think it's 13. Once they turn 13, until they turn 18, you have the option to have them unwound, which basically means they don't technically die. All of their parts are harvested, and so now in this world as well, you don't have disease and injury anymore, because if you get hurt, you just get a new body part. It's fine. And so it's really dark. You know, there's a scene in particular of like being in the first person as you're being unwound that still haunts me to this day. I have a fear of hospitals, and just the thought of laying there as you're being taken apart and you're conscious for it is just the most disturbing thing I think I can ever imagine. It is literally maybe the worst thing I've ever read, but also the best. So yeah, this was my introduction to Neal Shusterman, and he quickly became one of my very favorite authors. This book is one I read fairly recently. I think I read this last year, and that is These Shallow Graves by Jennifer Donnelly. I adore historical fiction. It is usually my go-to genre when I'm like looking for something to pick up, if I'm in a slump or if I just need a new book to read. I tend to gravitate toward historical fiction. And this is some great historical fiction. This is a story that takes place in New York at the turn of the century, so like 1905 maybe, I think is when this story takes place, but early 1900s, and you're following a girl who is trying to figure out what happened to her father. He died and they've ruled it a suicide, but she believes in her heart that he would not do that, and she's trying to figure out what happened, and she befriends a journalist at the newspaper. She harbors a desire to be a writer. She wants to be a journalist too, but she's supposed to get married and, you know, look pretty, and that's her role in life. She's a debutante. And so she's on this mission to unravel this mystery, and it's good. It is so good. I loved this. I devoured it in like 2 sittings. I could not stop reading. And I've been on a mission. I need to read more of Jennifer Donnelly's work because this book was just so well written, and the characters were so vivid, and I just loved it. This duology was one that I read right at the beginning, I think, of my YouTube channel, my YouTube career, if you will. I think I've had my YouTube channel for about 4 years, so I guess it's been about that long since I read this. And this is Wolf by Wolf by Ryan Groudon, and the sequel, it's a duology. The sequel is Blood for Blood. This series was so good. I raved about it for a good year or 2 on my channel, I think, and I'll still like tell you, you have to read this. If you haven't picked this up yet, make it happen. This is an alternate history where I believe it takes place in 1950 or 1952, somewhere in there, and in this world, the Axis powers of World War II have won the war, and now like the entirety of Europe and into Asia and all of that is connected between Japan and Germany, and they rule the world basically. And so we are following the character of Yael, who is working for the resistance. She is in the underground. She's a Jew, and there aren't many left. So she's working for the resistance, and she's tasked with entering this motorcycle race that takes place every year to like celebrate how great the Germans and the Japanese are. And it goes all the way across their territories. And so she's tasked with winning this race because the winner gets to meet Hitler. And so when she meets him, she is meant to assassinate him. And this story is so good. It's so crazy. You don't quite know what's happening a lot. This book ends in a huge cliffhanger. And Blood for Blood is just such a good conclusion. I cried. I was just on the edge of my seat the whole time. I love it. I still think about it to this day. Small Gods by Terry Pratchett has to be on this list because I think about this book all the time. This is my favorite of the Terry Pratchett books I've read thus far. This book is sort of I don't know, satire almost, a comedy that looks at how ridiculous religion is. So if you think that might bother you, don't read this. but as someone who is not religious, I thought this was great. This story follows Brother Brutha, who worships the great god and one day he finds this turtle who's fallen to earth. It is the great god but he's now stuck in the body of a turtle, and the only person that can hear him is Brutha, who is a very simple-minded monk. And the story is just so much fun. It's hilarious, and it's just so well thought out. Like, I think you could do an entire study of this book. It's just so rich and detailed, and there's so much going on, and there's so much commentary on the way that people use religion and the way that religions have spread, and I think it's fascinating, and I think everyone should read it. Next up, I have Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi, which I think I also read this did I read it last year? I feel like it was last year. I think I read this in 2018, and I think about this book all the time. This is such well-written, well-researched, well-thought-out historical fiction, but it's one of those books that on the surface it doesn't sound like it would be something I would like, because it's not like one set of characters you're reading through the whole story. It's almost like short stories that are all interconnected, and I enjoy short stories sometimes, but I really like having like a set of characters I can follow through a story. And so I went into this not expecting a lot, but it was so well done, and you kind of forget, the characters are all done so well that you kind of forget that you're only with them for a short time, and they just feel like real people that you've been following throughout the story, and like you're meeting their, it's basically, it starts with two sisters, one who was taken into slavery and one who stayed in Africa, and you follow their lines throughout. So the one line that gets brought to America through slavery, you're following their like generational line, and then the one that stays in Africa, you follow their generational line. And so it's really interesting to see the different ways that slavery has impacted people through history, and even the ones that remained in Africa were affected by it. And so it's really, I don't know, it was just so fascinating to read, and the characters are also rich, and I would love to read more by this author. I think I heard that Yaa Gyasi has a book coming out in 2020, so I'm looking forward to that. I don't know anything about it yet. I haven't done much research on that, but I did hear that that was happening. Another author I discovered this decade was Tiffany D. Jackson. I read Allegedly. Again, I think this was last year, and it blew my mind. I think I even have a video, Mind-Blowing Books, where I talked about this and Unwind. So you're following this character whose name I cannot remember right now, but she was arrested and put into jail as a child because she was accused of murdering a baby. And so you're following her now, I believe she's 16 when the story starts, and she's in this criminal justice system, which she calls it baby jail, and in the story she's living in a group home, and you just feel like so much sympathy for her. She's telling you what happened, and her mother treats her terribly, or at least she believes her mother treats her terribly. And she ends up getting pregnant, and she wants to fight to keep her baby, but obviously her being accused of murdering a baby, that makes it a thing that isn't likely to happen. And so you're following her through the story. It's so like twisty and in the best way, and it's a great look at this system that we have in place in our country and what happens to kids who are put through this system. And it was such a good story. And I also read Monday's Not Coming by her, which I loved, and I bought her newest book, which is Let Me Hear a Rhyme, I believe, and I haven't read it yet, but I really want to. She's quickly become one of my favorite authors. I can't wait to see what more she comes out with, but this book is excellent. This next book I read like this year, just a few months ago, and that is Lovely War by Julie Berry. This book is so good. I keep telling people they need to go pick it up. This book is a story that takes place during World War I, and it's about these four characters and their love affairs, but it's also told by the Greek gods who are putting Aphrodite on trial for not loving her husband or something like that. And so she's telling the story, and she has other gods come in and help her tell their story, and they're telling the story in the 1940s, so they're looking back on what happened during World War I as World War II is raging on, and it is just so good. I love books like this that are narrated in like an interesting way. I love like the gods showing how they pulled the strings of these people and made these things happen, and the characters are all so well drawn and so well thought out, and you have so much sympathy for them and what they're going through during this war, and it's so good. Oh my gosh. There's not enough books on World War I. I loved this so much. It's so good, and I just want everyone to go pick it up because Julie Berry's writing is stunning. These characters are amazing. I just love the creativity of how she told the story. Next I have Fingersmith by Sarah Waters, which was my very first book by Sarah Waters, and I say that like I've read more. I haven't. I need to. That is a thing I would like to do. I want to read all of her books because this book was so good. This is technically a thriller mystery novel, I guess. I think it would fall under thriller category. It takes place in Victorian England, and you're following these two characters. One is a girl who lives with her wealthy uncle. She is his ward. And then you're following another girl who is living with a poorer family in the city. And I don't even know how to explain this without being spoilery, because there are so many twisty, turny things going on. Like, I literally at one point dropped because I was reading this on my Kindle, dropped my Kindle and just went, what is happening right now? Like, nothing that happened was anything I could have predicted. It was just so good. I really want to read it again because I want to go back and read it again, knowing what happens, so I can try to see like where the pieces of the puzzle were placed to like put this all together, because oh my gosh, it was just so twisty and so just really good. The writing is stunning. Like, I need to read more of her books. It also has female romance in it if you're interested in that. Sarah Waters, go check out Fingersmith, read any of her other books. They're all, I'm sure, amazing, because this book was one of the best things I've read ever. One of my favorite trilogies I read in this past decade was the Chaos Walking trilogy by Patrick Ness, and it just blew my mind. This book, I think about this all the time. Like, I often ponder what happens throughout this novel, throughout this trilogy. It's about this colony that they've colonized this planet, but there's something in the air on the planet that causes men specifically to be able to hear all of their thoughts. Like, anything they think out is like broadcast. Women can hear them, men can hear each other, but men can't hear women's thoughts. Women's thoughts don't get broadcast in the same way, and it's called noise, and it's just like literally chaos. Everything that they think, and it comes out in words, it comes out in sound, it comes out in images, and so it's like just literally chaos all the time and very loud. And so you're following the perspective of Todd, who is living in Prentice Town, which is a colony, which is a little town where there's only men, and they think that they're the only people left. Todd is the last boy. He's about to turn 13, which would make him a man. He's about to be initiated into that, and he's in the woods, and he hears this pocket of quiet and goes to investigate and finds a girl. And in his mind, this is impossible because girls are all dead. Like, the noise killed the girls. So he doesn't understand how she's there, and it goes from there. And it's this whole like adventure, finding out about how they came to this planet, what actually happened in Prentice Town and why there's no women, what happened to the original, like to the inhabitants of this planet, which they call the Spackle. And I just love everything about the series. It's so well written. It's so good. Like, the way he talks about colonization in the story, the way it's a reflection of how like I was there, how Europeans like colonized America and how colonization always ends up badly. And I just think this is such a good story. The next book I want to talk about is The Librarian of Auschwitz by Antonio Iturbe. I have read a lot of books that deal with the Holocaust. Since I was probably 12, I've been somewhat fascinated in a dark, twisty way. I have been somewhat like just drawn to learning more. As a Jew, learning about it when I was a child, it was the most horrifying thing I could have ever imagined happening, and it still is. Like, I still can't quite wrap my brain around how something like this actually happened, and it did. But I have read a lot of books about that time period, and so I'm never like expecting that I'm gonna find a new favorite, but this book was just so incredible that it is now probably my favorite book that deals with the Holocaust. And that's saying a lot, because I have read a lot of books about that, like literally since I was 12. So, you know, I'm not gonna talk about how many years that is, but it's been a lot of years. So this is probably the best book that I've read on that topic. This story follows a bunch of people who are all real people, who all really did live through this. So the main person that this refers to, the librarian, is Dita Kraus, who was a girl in this camp. They had a special camp outside of the camp. So you had like a camp within a camp, basically, a concentration camp. And they were in this camp that was set up to be a show camp, so that when people came from outside of Germany, they could say, see, we have children here, we have a school, like, everything's fine, we're not hurting anybody. But obviously they were. So Dita is in the show camp, and you're hearing from her perspective, but you're also getting to see all these other people who were also in the show camp, and you see some people that were in the resistance, you see some people who were forced to work for the Nazis within the camp, like Jews that were made to do jobs for them, and people who escaped. You even meet Anne Frank for a moment in the story. It's just the way that the author has like interwoven all of these different people in all of their lives, and the fact that they were all real people, and that Dita Kraus is still alive today and helped him to write this. I just think it's such a beautifully told, harrowing story, and it's something that I think everyone should read. The last two books I'm going to talk about are both graphic novels, and those are The Walking Dead and Lock and Key. I'm going to talk about The Walking Dead first. I've read almost the entire series. I'm going to be finishing it this month, I think. So I'll have read the entirety of The Walking Dead comics within this past decade. And they're up there in my absolute favorite graphic novel series. This was what made me pick up my first graphic novel. Was I started The Walking Dead because I really liked the show, and I wanted to know like what was different in the comics, because I'd heard someone say that the comics are totally different, so I wanted to know how. So that's the first ever graphic novel I ever picked up, and it made me fall in love with this genre, and I've read a ton of graphic novels since then. I love the fact that this series isn't focused on the actual zombies. Like, obviously that is a thing that is happening, but I think he used zombies and the zombie apocalypse as a way of showing like different facets of humanity and what happens when you live in a world without rules, when you live in a place that's become completely lawless. Like, how does that affect you? And do you hold on to your humanity, or do you let go of it and just live like a wild animal and murder people for fun? And like, do you become a zombie essentially, or do you hold on and become the best person that you could have ever become because you've been forced into those situations? I just think that is such a fascinating way to tackle a story like this. I really like the characters, although I will say I get super confused if I haven't read the comics for a while. Like, I just picked this one up last night, and it's been over a month since I've read any of the comics, but we've been watching the show, and it was just like, it took me a minute to go, wait a second, all of these people are still alive. So yeah, it's totally different in the comics. Like, there's so many characters that are still alive in the comics that have been dead on the show for forever, and So I don't know. It's very different, but it's also very similar. Like the storylines are all the same essentially. Just they change around characters and stuff. But anyway, love the series so much. I'm excited to finish it, but also feeling a little sad because it has literally been a decade of me reading it. So, you know, that is a long time. That is a long time to devote to a story. And the last series I'm going to talk about is Lock and Key, also by Joe Hill. This is his graphic novel series. I'm very excited because I just heard him say that there's going to be more Lock and Key, and I cannot wait. I love this series. This also, just to tell you, is signed by Joe Hill because I've met him a few times. He's awesome, by the way, and he was kind enough to sign this for me. This story follows a family who have suffered a loss, a tragedy in their life. They move into this house that's in their family, and they live on Lovecraft Island, and this house is full of mystery, and there's all these keys that can do these things, and the children in particular are the ones that get caught up in all the different things that happen with the keys. And the story is so good, and I don't want to tell you too much because this is one of those stories that I think you get the most out of if you go in not knowing what's going to happen. It's just so well done. The art is really great. I think the art is just such a great style to tell the story. It goes really well, and the characters are just so well done and so rich and so detailed and developed, and like seeing how they grow and change throughout the story. I love it so much. And I'm very excited because I'm trying not to get too excited because I've been burned many times. Like there's been talk of a Lock and Key television show for so long. And every time I get really hyped about it, it gets canceled or it falls apart and nothing happens. And it's frustrating, but there's been a lot of talk about a Netflix series, and there was a picture of the cast, and I was just like, they look just like the comic book characters. I was so excited. Those are the books that I wanted to talk about. Those are the books that I feel like have made a big impact on me in this past decade. And I'm sure you guys are like, hey, I know that there are other books that I've heard you talk about a lot that should be on this list, and you're right. They're gonna be in my other list. They're gonna fall into the read aloud category. I will get to that video probably next week, maybe. It's been hard to find time to film. I have been so busy lately. My daughter's been sick. It's just been a lot. So I haven't had like any time to film anything, and it's been really bumming me out. I had like all these video plans for this month, and I didn't get a chance to do any of them. So those are my favorite books of this past decade. What books have resonated the most with you? What things have you read that just like you still think about them, or they've been added to your list of all-time favorites? Like, I would love to know. Please let me know down in the comments. I'd love to talk about what favorite books you have. Maybe I can add some things to my TBR for next year. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Happy reading. Bye.